When I moved to New York, which I did as fast as I could, 5 days after my college graduation, I found myself teaching 40 girls from all 5 boroughs in a cramped building in Brooklyn. Their sex education was better than mine, for sure, but there were gaps in their knowledge. They had questions, they believed in myths, and most of them felt uncomfortable talking to their teachers about it. As I got to know them and their lives, I began to understand more fully the scope of women's health and what young women need. Young women, and all women, need access to affordable health care. We need to be able to afford our birth control and our textbooks and our food. We need access to abortion services, no matter where we live, if we can pay for it or if we can get there on our own. We have a right to have children. We have a right to parent our own children and to not see those children incarcerated and failed by the education system. We have a right to make these choices and raise these children in an environment free of violence, whether it be domestic violence, sexual violence, sex trafficking, or the world of violence that goes on around us. I also realize that to move any further in this movement for women's health, we must recognize that racism, classism, ageism, and homophobia uniquely affect women and our safety in the world. I understood feminism that summer in that Brooklyn building and realized that I was proud to call myself a feminist activist. I understood that women radicalize each other by sharing our stories, that we hear our own pain and our own struggle in another woman's voice, and realize that there is nothing wrong with us and nothing wrong with them, but there's something wrong with the system and that we have to change it. I'm here today because Tracy Brooks and FPA understand that young women are the leaders of tomorrow. So I'm talking to the young women in the audience right now. If you hadn't noticed, no one in the news media and the politicians are going to tell us these stories for us. We as young women have to take responsibility for our message, for how our opinions and our issues are presented to the world. We are a voting bloc that the talking heads babbled on and on about during the election. But how many times did you stand up to your TV and say, "Gosh, Wolf Blitzer, you know exactly what it's like to be a young woman in America today." We could wait around for CNN to get it right forever, for the 37-year-olds with 2 kids writing from the young woman's perspective to pin our experience correctly, or for Lindsay Lohan to drive her pack of paparazzi to an anti-war rally for an unusual photo op. I'll keep hoping these things will happen, but I don't think that any of it's going to happen soon. Luckily for those of us, we're in a great environment here in New York to find our legs and make our mark. New York State has a proud history of doing what's right by women first, a product of a long-standing tradition of fierce women's rights activists, working in conjunction with like-minded elected officials to make laws and practices more fair and equal for women. In fact, the tradition of female equality on this land is far older than the state, reaching back to the Iroquois Confederacy, which treated the sexes with more equality than any developed society at the time. Elder women of the tribe carried the responsibility of choosing the chief, and they could decide when to go to war and when to end war. In fact, using this example, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, Matilda Jocelyn Gage, and those thousands of unnamed women who marched saw this native example and used its logic to lobby for full voting rights for women, starting at Seneca Falls. Margaret Sanger understood that even before women got the right to vote, that the key to full human female equality was that each woman be able to control her reproduction and, as she said, be the absolute mistress of her own body. New York also became the first state to legalize abortion without the qualifiers of rape and incest, allowing women and their doctors unprecedented freedom to make personal reproductive health decisions. As it goes, years of activism on the part of New Yorkers from all walks of life preceded that law. Pastor Howard Moody of New York City started the Clergy Consultation Service in New York City in 1967, a network of holy men and women who referred women in need of services to safe providers. These men risked arrest and religious censure to be activists for women's health. Ruth Cusack, a woman from Long Island, a wife and a mother, spent years lobbying, speaking, and writing in support of a bill to repeal all abortion laws. And of course, we have our feminist rabble-rousers as well. During a hearing on the abortion reform bill, the Red Stockings group, a group of radical New York City feminists, interrupted to protest that only one of the 15 witnesses at this hearing was a female, and she was a nun. Their demands that only women be allowed to discuss abortion because only women could understand abortion fell on deaf ears in the Capitol. So they took their protest to the media and later organized a speak out for women to share their abortion stories. Lucky for me, New York also has a history of adopting and fostering women who feel a bit like a fish out of water in their native states. A young woman from Toledo, Ohio, attended the Red Stockings New York City abortion speak out to cover it for a magazine. The writer left energized, pissed off, and completely converted to the cause of women's liberation. That Toledo writer was Gloria Steinem, who went on to help found the women's movement and the magazine that served as its voice. These activists worked with brave and dedicated legislators. First among them, Connie Cook, who sponsored that bill for 3 years and fought every single day to convince her male colleagues that they needed to vote for the bill for their wives, their sisters, and their mothers. And of course, Senator Michaels, who voted no. And then when it came down to one last vote, he stood up and he said, "Mr. Speaker, I am terminating my political career, but I cannot in good conscience allow my vote to defeat this bill. I change my vote from no to yes." New York State is steeped in women's history. Today, we are again in the midst of making women's history in the state of New York. Remember, you were here. When New York passes the Healthy Teens Act, it will be the first state in the nation to fund comprehensive sex education and set an example for the states and for the nation of putting women's health first and putting young people's lives at the first and foremost. I love saying this, I am now a proud resident of New York State. I've been working for comprehensive sex education for 7 years. I'm 22 years old. That's a third of my life. I can't put into words what it would mean for me to see this bill passed in the state of New York. As a New York resident, I stand here as a legacy of the women before me, of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, of Susan B. Anthony, of Shirley Chisholm and Bella Abzug, of Connie Cook and Gloria Steinem and Barbara Jordan and Hillary Clinton. I take this legacy seriously, and I stand here to vow to carry on the battle. Women, men, residents of the state of New York, we found our voices this last year, yelling, "Yes, we can," and yes, we did. We leave here today to go speak to our legislators, armed with a mandate, armed with our stories, and wearing the armor of the women and men who fought for these things before us. Let's go out and tell them women's health matters.